Hi, I'm Eugene Dilan, and I'm a results leader.
You're listening to ResultsLeader.fm. Being a thought leader is easy. Getting results is hard. This show is for the results leader who lives and dies by their results. Here is your host and Chief Results Leader, Jonathan Rivera.
This is ResultsLeader.fm, the only show on the internet dedicated to the coaches and consultants who are obsessed with getting results for their clients. Welcome back to another episode. So glad you're here. And as always, I've got a treat for your ears in today's episode. Why corporations are wasting billions of dollars on workshops that do not help. The Tenga secret to living a resilient life and attaining your goals. The one investment that you can never lose. And how slowing down gets you better results. Today, Mr. Eugene Dilan joins us. He is a PhD. He is a consultant, a leadership expert, a master facilitator, and a motivational speaker. Let's jump in. Eugene, welcome to the show. Are you ready to rock this thing?
I am ready to go and really excited to be here.
Let's do it. Let's give our listeners a quick win. What book have you given most as a gift?
There's two books, and I had like an internal battle around which one to mention, but I'm going to start with the one called Attached. And Attached is a book that speaks about attachment theory. So often people get anxious in relationships or they have difficulty connecting. And as a psychologist consultant, I often hear about all these maturations that people are having in relationships. And I think that fundamentally understanding what your own attachment style is the first step to being able to build more effective relationships. And so very often I give that to people. The other one that I often give is called Flawless Consulting. I am the kind of person that does pick up the phone, does speak to strangers. And so it is not uncommon for someone to reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, hey, can we talk for a few minutes? I want to learn a little bit about the business that you're in. I'm thinking of going into it. So over the years, I've taken up a few mentees that just randomly reached out to me. And that book literally goes step by step by step in terms of what you need to do. It's written in a very accessible language, and everything from contracting to how to market to following the steps for understanding what's going on with a client. Again, I find it's something that I have read several times, and as a refresher in terms of, okay, getting back to basics in terms of how to really do consulting work. Yeah. So it's a great book by Peter Block.
Okay. 2 new books to add to the reading list. Thank you for bringing those to us. And now it is story time. So can you tell us a story of how an apparent failure set you up for later success?
So again, this was a difficult one because I have had a lot of failure along the way. The ones that really stick out in my mind are, for starters, literally becoming a psychologist. I went to undergraduate school at Rutgers in New Jersey, and those first 2 semesters were not good if you looked at those transcripts. And I remember meeting with the dean because I was on probation, and he said, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I'm like, well, I want to be a psychologist. And he said, you're not going to be a psychologist, not with these kinds of grades. And that really kind of set me on a road to reflecting and seeking support. And, long story short, I became a psychologist. So that you're never going to make it talk that I got really kind of set me up in terms of looking within self and finding the energy and the determination to push through. And it took me a little bit longer than most because I worked full time through my bachelor's, my master's, and my doctorate. But I did it and went further in that. Of course, I started a business afterward as well. So that's probably the one that sticks out the most for me. And I'm trying to think in terms of the consulting world, I'll tell you a little bit about that. Most consulting firms hire 20-somethings fresh out of college, fresh out of master's programs. And when I was working and going to school, most of my work was managing nonprofits and seeing, patients in clinics. So I worked with everything from homeless to addicts to you name it. And what I discovered was that as I went from job to job, I got promoted. I really loved the going in and starting something new, the challenge, the meeting new people, the building the teams. And I said, wow, I think I should be a consultant. And I have to tell you that for 5 or 6 years, I applied to consulting jobs and got a no, a no, a no, and another no. I was completely demoralized. And in January, I forget of when, I saw an ad in the APA Monitor, a newspaper for psychologists, that said, looking for clinical psychologists who have management experience, will train to become international consultants. And I saw the deadline, and this was like January 12th or something. And the deadline was like December 23rd. And I'm like, damn it. And I said, you know what? Send your resume in anyway. And I did. And by Valentine's Day, I got a call. I was flown out to DC, spent a whole day of interviews. They took us out to dinner, gave us alcohol. They want to make sure that we could manage our alcohol in front of clients. By Valentine's Day, I had a really nice offer, the highest paying job I had ever gotten. And for the next 10 years, I worked with that British firm internationally consulting. And that's really what set me up for starting my own company almost 12 years ago. But that was a huge failure to me in that I just couldn't crack that nut because all the big firms really wanted moldable young people. And I was beyond the moldable by that point in my career. But I kept pressing through. And even when the date for the resumes was expired, just a little voice inside of me said, send it anyway. And so I did.
I would classify that as resilience. And how did you develop that resilience to keep going, even though it looked like everything was not working in your favor?
You know, that's a great question. And it's a personal answer. I think I may have mentioned to you when we briefly talked that my parents moved from Puerto Rico to New York. My father had a fifth grade education. Mom took care of kids. Dad was a handyman. And it was not uncommon for us to go without. And my mother always said in Spanish, tengan fe, have faith. And to this day, I hearken back to those words whenever I get into a moment when I know that I need to push through. I do believe the mind is a powerful thing. And as a psychologist, I know that it is. And I do think that where the mind goes, your behavior follows. And so you have to pay attention to what you're thinking. If you don't think something is possible, then it won't be. You have to believe that you can. And any little step that you take, any increment is a movement in the direction. And I believe it creates energy in the world. Any movement toward your goal creates more energy.
I'm going to take a detour.
Okay. Detours are allowed.
So have faith. I love the have faith idea. And I'm curious because you're talking as a doctor, as a psychologist, as a rational person, but how much does emotion play a part in keeping that faith?
Yeah. So first, let me clarify that faith doesn't just come in the religious sense. Faith is about confidence in self. Faith is about confidence in others. Faith is about knowing the ability that you have within and trusting that you have the skills and the ability. So in that sense, it's not just about some higher being coming in to intercede. So I don't believe that emotion is the enemy. I believe that we actually need emotion. What I would say is it's not a one size fits all. We're all wired slightly differently. You know, if you understand psychology, some of us are very focused on emotion, and we use emotion to kind of move through the world. And some people move through the world very logically. You know, we all have the capacity for both, but we all have our defaults. So for me, emotion it gives me energy. I also think that emotion is connected to my intuition. And intuition is an inner knowing that sometimes cognitively we haven't quite connected the dots, but the inner knowing has already. And it's amazing. There's all kinds of studies about empathy and how when you sit with someone, you actually influence the way that they're feeling. We also know that from research that when people are really sick, being around loved ones, that energy can be healing. So there's lots we don't quite understand, but I believe that emotions and energy, even the immune system, all of it is connected. I do think that emotions that are not managed, emotions that are acted out can be destructive. I think we have to learn to use our words around emotion rather than actions. And it's never okay to disrespect someone, although we all have moments when we have, including moi. And you have to own that and you have to try and repair it. But emotions are an essential part. I will say one last thing about this. I think of logic and emotions as the two wings of an airplane. And you know as well as I do, because you've probably flown around a little bit, that if you lean on one wing, you spin in circles. And so it's really about the temperance. It's really about the balancing. It's the checks and balances between the two that I think allow you to move forward.
What would you say is the most worthwhile investment that you've ever made?
So again, I have two answers for this as well, because you can't have one answer for anything. The first one is clearly, Jonathan, education. I come from, nobody had a bachelor's other than the school teachers. And given where I came from, when I graduated undergraduates, my doctorate, I had $170,000 worth of student loans. I had missed many a party that friends were going to, ski trips because I couldn't afford it. There's many things that I sacrificed in terms of an investment so that I could get an education. People can steal your vote, they can steal your money, but education they can never take away from you. It's the one thing you invest in and you always, always have it. No one can take it away from you because once it's in your head, it's influenced, I think, the way that you think and the way that you show up. And so it just can't be taken away. I think it's one of the most valuable things that we can give young people is a good education. The second one is next week, I celebrate 20 years of being in my, not marriage, because we weren't married at first. Even though I was already an adult, I've grown up a lot as a result of the commitment to that relationship, the investment that I've made in terms of time, energy, emotion, financial, all of it. You know, we grow through others. Other people are mirrors. They help us to see ourselves in ways that we don't necessarily, again, self-awareness is something that all of us struggle with. And it's through others that we encounter ourselves, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so investing in relationships is something that I think will heal you, will open doors for you, will help you to grow in ways that you can't even imagine when you invest in relationships. And what's funny about that answer is the answer I have for your next question. So, but I won't get ahead of myself here.
But I might not be going to that question because I'm going to skip right past it and go to what are some bad recommendations you hear in your area of expertise?
So bad recommendations I hear in my area of expertise, you know, there are many of them. And I'm going to start with change management. You know, organizations spend sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending on the size of the organization, on implementing a change. And the advice of someone like the McKinseys, or I should be careful with throwing names out there, but a lot of these big consulting firms, they work at the top level and they kind of architect everything at that level. And then it becomes a push down approach. And what I have found is that that is the worst thing that you can do when you're trying to implement a major change. When you're trying to implement a major change, while the top level may define what the opportunity is, ultimately engaging the people in the front lines and helping them to create, giving them the tools to create the path forward, especially because it's going to impact them. People should just show up differently. They own that solution versus become a victim of the solution that's being forced on them. And we all know that when we're in a state of victimhood, we don't tap into our best selves. And sometimes my organization gets called in to do the cleanup. You know, it's working fine at the top level, but not anyplace else. Well, guess why? Because they weren't included. The other one is very related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So often consultants come in and offer you this workshop or that workshop, and whether it's unconscious bias. And of course, we offer a lot of these things as well. But what is different is that we offer an organizational assessment. We want to come in and not put a Band-Aid on the problem over here, because the problem over here is related to an infrastructure that has allowed for that problem to happen. So if you don't kind of get back to the root of the problem and look at the structural things that need to change, then I think you're really just kind of putting a patch on it, kind of like whack-a-mole. You whack it here, but it pops up over there because fundamentally you haven't changed the environment. And in truth, workshops teach people knowledge. They don't change behavior necessarily. You have to go further. It cannot be a one and done. It really has to be, again, helping people to know and understand themselves, looking at the structure, looking at the environment, and what needs to change about that, including organizational values. And honestly, sometimes organizations at the senior level, the intervention is for the people over there. We senior level people, we've got this. And the reality is that they don't. They're the part of the problem that actually is allowing this to go on. And so I'll stop there. I mean, I could go on with many more things, but I'll stop there.
We interrupt your regularly scheduled program for a public service announcement. We're going to get right back into this show, but I wanted to ask you a question. If you have been listening to the show for any amount of time and you've picked up even one single tip, then I need your help. Get the word out. Tell people about resultsleader.fm. Share it on social media, share it on your email, share it anywhere. #ResultsLeaderFM. Now let's jump back into the interview. Let's talk about results. Why do results matter?
That's a great question. And when I talk about employee engagement, I often refer back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Organizations spend, I forget what the number was, $1.5 billion a year trying to improve employee engagement. And when you look at the data, it all just goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. People want to feel safe. They want to feel valued. They want to learn. They want to self-actualize. They want to feel connected to the other people around them. And fundamentally, the answer to this question is about that. As human beings, a core need of ours is to learn and to grow. We want to have a sense of accomplishment, of self-actualization. And when we don't have that, I think we're kind of rudderless to some degree. I also think results are important because every time that you reach a milestone or don't reach a milestone, but you've set a milestone, it gives you an opportunity to reflect. What was the learning? What do I need to take forward? What do I need to do differently? And so unless you kind of set a milestone in terms of what results you want to get, what's the point? If you're putting in a lot of effort and you don't get results, at some point you say, what the heck? Why am I spinning my wheels here? People get motivated by results. That's why oftentimes, even in a change initiative or any kind of a project, it's helpful to break it down. Because if you break it down, you have this sense of accomplishment that kind of snowballs and gives you more energy to bring to the next phase of the project. Results are really, really important. Now, I think it's important not to walk around thinking, I am my results. The world sometimes challenges us, and so we can't over-identify with that. I don't know if I'm being clear here, but we are all good, whole, worthy, regardless of what the outcomes are. I think we need to set the milestones again so that we can learn and grow and figure out what we need to do differently. I don't think we need to over-identify with outcomes because sometimes there is luck and none of us gets anywhere or accomplishes anything alone. And so if we over-identify, we may not recognize all of the other humans who stood beside us, whether it's just emotional support or real support of rolling up your sleeves. But yes, results are very, very important. And I don't think I would be here without them.
It reminds me, I'm probably going to butcher it, but Zig Ziglar talks about failure isn't a person, it's an event, and kind of detaching yourself from that. So I'm glad you brought that up. Let's look back over the last 5 years. What new realization has helped you get better results for your clients?
So the last 5 years has been really interesting, Jonathan. As you know, we have had a pandemic. We have had economic meltdown. So there's many things that I could reflect on. I want to start by going back to our mantra, our philosophy that business is human. I think that fundamentally, the world of business is asking us to rethink how we approach business. I think, Jonathan, that once upon a time, if I had eggs and you had milk, we would trade. Business was about supporting each other. it wasn't about just raising profits. And while I do think that business does need to make profits, I sometimes think that the pendulum has kind of gone a little bit far, and that business being human means that we have to think about all the stakeholders. And the last 5 years with COVID, the pandemic, the economic meltdown, the inequities, the social injustice, George Floyd, all of this has, I think, showed us that there are real human beings with emotions and families and people who have debt and mortgages and rents. And we cannot continue moving through business with a mindset that says, I got mine, I'm out of here. We kind of have to really start thinking about each other as well. How do we lift the boat for everybody? I do think that that was something that I always kind of thought, but the last 5 years, I think that there's a psychological contract between employers and employees, the unspoken agreements, and that contract was broken. And I think that it's not being spoken about directly, like, what are my expectations of you as an employer, you of me as an employee, other than a job description? I think it's currently being renegotiated. I think that employees don't want to come back to the office. You have unions beginning to come back online because I think fundamentally the pendulum had just gone too far, and people ultimately are the secret sauce that make the world go round, make the business, if we don't take care of, people always say, my people are the best resources. Yeah, well, how are you taking care of them? More often than not, they're not. And so again, business does need to make money, absolutely. But I think business ultimately needs to be about improving the human condition, not just the personal condition of a few. And so for me, that's something that everything that we've been going through has really kind of focused me on that and how that translates into the work that we do. And ultimately, I think it's about helping people to reflect on the decisions they're making, helping people to look at the values they espouse and whether or not their behaviors are congruent with those values, and calling people out if they're not. Because I feel if you don't challenge people, then I'm not doing my job either. Anyway, I'll stop there.
What area of your business would you like better results?
So I would say that it's interesting because when I read that question, I wasn't sure if you meant better results with my clients or if you meant better results for me. I was like, well, that question has different sides to it. Where I landed first was with clients. I feel that so often you have to meet clients where they are. And so sometimes clients come in and they have self-diagnosed, self-prescribed, and they expect you just to write the prescription, And so where I would like better results, and in particular in the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, is that I wish more organizations would do a real organization assessment that looks at everything versus this one and done or check the box by doing a workshop. You need to look at everything from equity in terms of how people are being paid, who's being hired, who's not being hired, who's even getting the interviews and who's not, who's being promoted. You need to look at your social media. You need to look at where is your organization donating money. If you're espousing diversity, equity, inclusion, but you're still only giving to this one organization that has a lot of money. So you really kind of need to, I wish that there was more opportunity, that more organizations really wanted to do the work. Because I do think that that would help to create a change in our society if organizations really were doing the deep work. When I started the answer to this question, I said, you have to meet clients where they are. And so sometimes we're able to influence. You come in and you say, you're talking about this, you do a little bit of this, and you create the trust and the curiosity to want to build on it. But I do think that if you're going to really do diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility and all of that, you really need to take a holistic approach and look at the whole organization and put together a strategy and plan for all the different levels versus just for the line workers or the teams. Even the boards sometimes don't get included in this. And so how can you tell me your organization is diverse when I'm looking and everyone is an old white guy? There's a disconnect. And so I hope that as we go forward that we're able to do more of that kind of work. It's emotional, it's difficult, but it's the kind of work that I think when you do it, doesn't just impact the way that you work. I think it impacts the way that you show up in life as a whole. So,
any parting thoughts you want to share with the results leaders who are listening to us right now?
I would say that it's not a straight line. So you need to be prepared that business goes up, it goes down, trends, your methodologies need to change based on what's going on in the environment. You can't get too attached that this is my way or the right way. It's a lesson that sometimes we have to learn several times or keep learning, but you have to be open to learn and pivot and change, because ultimately, if you want to help other people, you have to be reading the environment and be willing to do it differently in the service of getting good outcomes.
Where can our listeners get more from you?
So I have a YouTube where I interview some people similar to you, not as many episodes as you've done. It's called Dilan Delivers. We have a website. We have a lot of blogs there. And I'm always happy to talk to people. So people should feel free to email me, eugene@dilanconsulting.com. At the end of the day, business is human. And there are people that I talked to once 20 years ago that randomly call me up and want support or just want to check in or want to thank me for something that I said that I can't even remember that I said. Staying connected to people, building relationships. Ultimately, you never know where that's going to lead, and I guarantee it will make you a better person.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Results Leaders, for tuning in. Another episode is in the can. That is a wrap for another edition of ResultsLeader.fm. If you are out there getting results for your clients and you want to be featured on the show, go to ResultsLeader.fm now and apply to be on the show. And if you love what you're hearing, share the show, give us a rating and review, do anything to help us get the message out there. Thought leadership is easy, but results leadership is hard. We'll catch you on the next one.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.